Value of China's currency is stabilizing today after falling to its lowest level in 11 years. That tumble led U.S. stocks to plunge yesterday. The Dow closed 767 points down. Tom Hansen has more on the worst day for Wall Street this year so far.
The Dow closed down more than 700 points after falling more than 900 earlier in the day. The sell-off on Wall Street was fueled by China's move to significantly weaken the yuan against the dollar. That makes Chinese products cheaper on the worldwide market, which can hurt U.S. manufacturers. That's making investors around the world nervous.
We're hoping that at some point that this bottoms out. I think it's going to take us a few more sessions to get there.
In a series of tweets, President Trump called out China, labeling the devaluation currency manipulation that hurts U.S. businesses and workers. All of this follows threats from the Trump administration last week of more trade tariffs on $300 billion of Chinese goods starting in September, effectively extending tariffs to almost all Chinese imports. The president says China will pay the price, but investors don't see it that way.
Those are going to hit the U.S. companies first, and there's going to be a little bit of time which they're going to be able to withstand that pain, but eventually that will trickle down to the consumer, and that's where the American public is very uneasy.
Now, North Korea is threatening further weapons tests after firing 2 unidentified projectiles. It is the 4th such test in 2 weeks. The tests are in retaliation for the combined US-South Korea annual military exercises, which are currently underway. South Korea's military puts the site of the latest launch as South Hwanghae province, so the projectiles had to fly across the peninsula before landing in the East Sea, also known as the Sea of Japan. The increasing tensions on the peninsula threaten to derail negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington. Our correspondent Laura Bicker has been explaining more.
Well, Pyongyang appears to be piling on the pressure. It has launched 2 missiles from its west coast, flew right over the peninsula and landed in the Sea of Japan, also known as the East Sea here in South Korea. These missiles, certainly Pyongyang must have some confidence in them if they are prepared to fire them over their own peninsula. It comes at the same time as the North Korean Foreign Ministry released a statement saying that they believe that the joint US-South Korean military exercises, which started yesterday, were a violation of the agreements that Kim Jong-un had reached with both Washington and Seoul. This is a stern warning. Pyongyang appears to want to put pressure on Seoul and Washington to do a deal. Meanwhile, Donald Trump continues to say he's in no rush. He continues to say these short-range missile tests are not in violation of the promise between him and Kim Jong-un. But the question for the United States and for people here in Seoul is how long does North Korea continue this sort of pressure? And will Kim Jong-un be prepared to step up these missile tests, in fact fire intercontinental ballistic missiles, longer-range missiles, conduct nuclear tests to try to get the attention of the United States?
There's a nationwide test of the emergency alert system Wednesday, August 7th at 12:20 p.m. Eastern. All radio and television stations should send out that broadcast message, but not your cell phones. The test is used to evaluate the readiness of the national alerting capability in the absence of internet connectivity.
People screaming, scattering, widespread panic in Times Square after mistaking the sounds of a motorcycle backfiring for the worst.
And we just got pop, 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 pop. I thought that somebody just came here and started shooting people. It sounded like gunshots. It definitely did. 2,000 or 3,000 people maybe just like dissipated into like thin air.
Police say just before 10 p.m., a motorcycle passing through the area of 7th Avenue and 46th Street in a group of motorcycles backfired, resulting in a stampede of people running for their lives, or so they believed.
They were all running, man, running everywhere, man. Almost got hit by cars and everything. They jumped out of their shoes. There were shoes everywhere.
Hats and shoes, anything they dropped, they didn't care. They just kept going. But you would. You're thinking somebody's about to kill me.
In the chaos, police say nearly 24 people were hurt, some taken to the hospital, but all are okay.
An explosion at a remote site. Shifting stories from the Russian government and nuclear officials. Public concern about radiation exposure. We're not talking about Chernobyl 33 years ago. We're talking about 2 Russian military accidents near the Arctic Circle, one just last week. Our William Brangham has the details.
Somber crowds lined the streets of Sarov today, bearing witness to funerals cloaked in mystery after a nuclear reactor explosion at a nearby missile testing site killed at least 7 scientists. The final death toll is unknown. Russian nuclear officials have been slow to disclose details. But with long faces, they admitted Thursday's blast at their Nyonoska testing site was a tragedy.
A chain of tragic incidental events and uncertainties led to this happening. Although after a preliminary analysis, we have seen the testers were fighting to get the situation under control. Unfortunately, they did not succeed.
Authorities say they'll briefly evacuate the town of Severodvinsk. Officials say gamma radiation there is 4 to 16 times greater than background levels. Analysts believe the accident involved a new nuclear-powered cruise missile, the kind Russian President Vladimir Putin boasted about last year.
A real technologic breakthrough is the creation of the Advanced Strategic Missile System, with a totally new combat equipment and programming cruise unit. Its testing was completed successfully.
Jeffrey Lewis is the director of the East Asia Non-Proliferation Program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies.
Since about late 2017, Russia has been developing a nuclear-powered cruise missile. Because this cruise missile uses a nuclear reactor as its power source, it seems like it's incredibly finicky. The easiest way to think of this missile is as a tiny flying Chernobyl.
Moscow's push for new missile technology is aimed at outsmarting defense systems the U.S. is building.
Power cut caused travel chaos and cut electricity for almost 1 million people in England and Wales.
National Grid says the problem was caused by 2 power stations failing at the same time, which is described as an incredibly rare event.
Stranded trains, hours of travel chaos, and nearly 1 million people left in the dark. A day on, and people are asking how problems at just 2 power plants could have caused such major national outages. In total, around 300,000 people in London and the South East were left without power, while in the Midlands, South West and Wales, 500,000 were affected. Northern Power Grid, which services Yorkshire and the North East, said 11,000 were affected, while 26,000 people were left in the dark in the North West.
U.S. stocks took a steep dive Wednesday amid new warning signs of uncertainty in the economy. Interest rates on the bond market dropped to levels that have been a past indicator of an oncoming recession. Don Daler is on Wall Street with the latest.
The symbol of Wall Street might be a steadfast bull, but traders reacted like skittish colts to today's news. A key signal that a recession may well be just around the corner sent the Dow plunging 800 points. Diana Swang, chief economist at Grant Thornton, says investors are fleeing stocks for safety in bonds.
The easiest way to understand it is that basically long-term rates, anything that's out there that's more than a year, or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, those rates are now lower than short-term rates. It means you're not willing to place a bet on the future. And that's the fear, is that this could actually trigger a credit crisis.
But it doesn't mean a recession is imminent. Historically, it could take 18 to 24 months to arrive, if at all. In this case, a recession could come right around the 2020 election. The other factor influencing the market sell-off, a global economic slowdown. China, embroiled in a trade war with the U.S., reported its slowest growth figures since 1992. Japan's economic growth decreased to 1.8%. Germany's economy shrank with exports lagging, and much of Europe followed suit, with production plunging the most in 3 years.
Russian airline pilots averted a disaster this morning outside Moscow. They landed their jet in a cornfield after a bird strike when it took off. Incredibly, no one was killed. Passengers were seen near the field after the crash landing. Holly Williams is tracking this story from London. Holly, the video is incredibly scary.
That's right. Good morning. Well, the passengers on board the Airbus 321 must have seen their lives flash before their eyes. The video of the plane heading towards the ground is pretty distressing to watch. You can hear the engines laboring, apparently losing power. And then screams from the passengers as they hit the ground. The plane's landing gear was reportedly still up, so no wheels on the ground. But miraculously, the pilot managed to land in a cornfield just outside Moscow airport, and all 226 passengers and 7 crew members survived. 23 people have been hospitalized, one reportedly with serious injuries. The problem started when the plane collided with a flock of gulls, according to the Russian air agency. Apparently, some of the birds were sucked into its engines, causing both of them to fail.
The manhunt here in New York City after a bomb scare shut down a major subway station during the morning commute. A massive response after 2 suspicious devices were found underground, a third found about a mile away. Bomb squad teams, you see them right here, carefully investigating. Soon after, the NYPD releasing these surveillance images, calling this man a person of interest. ABC's Gio Benitez is in Lower Manhattan.
At the height of New York City's busy morning commute, the bomb squad racing to downtown Manhattan reports of a possible explosive device, finding 3 abandoned rice cookers, 1 on the street near a trash can and 2 more inside a subway station. Police later giving the all clear, no explosives inside.
It certainly is the kind of thing that we would want to know, why is he placing them there and what is the purpose of that.
At least 2 people were killed when a small plane crashed into a home in New York State. The plane carrying 3 people slamming into the home and then bursting into flames.
This morning, investigators searching through wreckage after a plane slammed into a home in upstate New York.
I was in my house and I heard boom, boom.
The impact killing the pilot and 1 person inside the home. A second person inside remains missing this morning. A third escaped.
There was a woman in the house and she jumped out of the window onto a ladder with her dog, and she told us that there was a man in the house, which was her father, still in.
We need an ambulance to the scene, 2 more ALS ambulances to the scene, and a helicopter.
The crash near Poughkeepsie igniting a fire that brought out firefighters from neighboring towns.
The back of the house where the plane hit was really engulfed.
Investigators revealing the pilot reported engine trouble shortly after taking off from Republic Airport on Long Island, crashing just miles from its destination. The NTSB now investigating to find out exactly what went wrong.
Tonight, tentative progress to end the war in Afghanistan. Multiple sources with direct knowledge of peace talks between the U.S. and the Taliban tell NBC News the administration is prepared to withdraw thousands of American troops in exchange for concessions from the Taliban, including preventing Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for terrorists, denouncing al-Qaeda, a ceasefire, and talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government. If met, the sources say the U.S. could draw down from 14,000 troops to between 8,000 and 9,000. The president today.
We're reducing it. We've been there for 19 years. We're really serving as policemen. We could win Afghanistan in 2 days or 3 days or 4 days if we wanted, but I'm not looking to kill 10 million people.
But there are many skeptics who worry the Taliban can't be trusted, that President Trump is pushing for a deal for a political win, and that leaving too quickly could lead to state collapse, like when President Obama pulled out of Iraq.
An explosion ripped through a wedding in Kabul, Afghanistan, killing dozens of people and injuring nearly 200 more. And breaking this morning, ISIS is now claiming responsibility. ABC's Julia McFarlane is in London with details on that deadly bombing. Good morning, Julia.
Good morning, Eva. Tragedy once again in the Afghan capital of Kabul. Invitations for this wedding ceremony said, "We celebrate with a world of hope and desire." A sentiment crushed last night as a suicide bomber killed at least 63 people at this wedding reception in Kabul. More than 180 people were injured. With so many casualties flooding the hospital, patients were treated in the hallways. Witnesses telling ABC News the event was attended by families and children. The Taliban, who claimed responsibility for a bombing at a police station in Kabul just 10 days ago, condemned this attack. This morning, as you say, ISIS's affiliate in Afghanistan say they were behind this attack.
Now, Julia, this comes at the same time as the U.S. is holding peace talks with the Taliban. Where do things stand with that?
That's right. The US and the Taliban, they've just concluded the 8th round of peace talks to end the Afghan war, now in its 18th year. On Friday, President Trump held a high-level meeting with his Afghan envoy, along with top security staff at his golf club in Bedminster. He said that both sides want a deal to end the war.
Syria, and today is just one example of how dangerous that is. Turkey is blaming the Assad government forces for bombing one of its military convoys in Syria's northwest Idlib province. Now, that area is part of a deal brokered between Turkey, Russia, and Iran that was originally supposed to be a de-escalation zone. Our Middle East correspondent Emily Rose joins us with the details. What can you tell us about this incident, Emily?
Well, Kalev, it looks as though, for now, Turkey is condemning this move. They say that that convoy was en route to one of its observation posts, one of its 12 observation posts in the country, and it looks as though they are blaming the regime forces, the Syrian forces, for that attack.
Emily, why would they actually send a convoy to Idlib in the first place?
So Turkey backed a few different pockets of armed rebels in that area. We have to remember that that whole enclave sits just on the border with Turkey, and it doesn't want refugees and Syrians fleeing and flocking to its border. So it has been sending military aid to bolster support behind those armed militias that are facing the Assad regime in Syria, and it is doing so, one, to try to keep balance in the region, and two, because as you mentioned just earlier, this area was actually classified as what was considered a de-escalation zone, and it wants to try to stay true to that, though we know since April, escalation has really taken an uptick in that area, leading to the death of some 860 civilians so far.
Overnight, a U.S. military drone is shot down over Yemen. Officials believe it may have been hit by a surface-to-air missile by Houthi rebels, a group backed by Iran. Now, this comes 2 months after Iran shot down a U.S. surveillance drone, claiming it violated their airspace.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that in some places, ISIS is more powerful than it has been in years. Pompeo made those statements Tuesday during an exclusive interview on CBS This Morning. He also addressed new concerns that the terror group is gaining ground in the Middle East. In Afghanistan, a growing threat from ISIS could complicate peace talks currently taking place between the U.S. and the Taliban. Those talks are aimed at withdrawing American troops from the region. A recent Inspector General report confirmed a resurgence of ISIS in Syria after a drawdown of U.S. forces there. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin has more from the Pentagon.
Fighters in Syria taking an oath of allegiance to ISIS and vowing to fight on, nearly 6 months after the fall of the last pockets of territory that made up their so-called caliphate. It's a propaganda video, but it represents a reality acknowledged by Secretary of State Pompeo to Gayle King on CBS This Morning.
So what we've always said is the caliphate's been gone and that there's always risk that there'll be a resurgence.
A recent report by the Pentagon's Inspector General said ISIS had solidified its insurgent capabilities in Iraq and was resurging in Syria. The report cited estimates that ISIS still has between 14,000 and 18,000 members in Iraq and Syria, and the opportunity to recruit more from among tens of thousands of refugees living in poorly guarded camps. The U.S. has 5,200 troops in Iraq and nearly 1,000 in Syria, where the top commander for the Middle East, General Frank McKenzie, recently told CBS News U.S. Special Forces are helping local tribes track down ISIS fighters.
They try to get in the desert up here, sort of an empty quarter desert of southeastern Syria, and our partners go out and get them, and we help them do that.
But ISIS is still capable of suicide bombings, assassinations, and ambushes.
Is it gaining strength, in your opinion?
It's complicated. There's certainly places where ISIS is more powerful today than they were 3 or 4 years ago.
In Afghanistan, ISIS claimed responsibility for this weekend's bombing of a wedding party, which killed nearly 70 civilians.
President Trump departs for the crucial G7 summit in Biarritz, France tonight, but not before reportedly grumbling about having to go at all, or reportedly discussing new tariffs on his hosts there, America's oldest ally, or escalating a trade war with China with global consequences, or calling his hand-picked Federal Reserve chairman the country's enemy, more so than the communist leader of China. Or we might add, when markets took a massive hit as a result, joking about it. And again, this is all of it at the end of a week in which he canceled a state visit with another ally because that country, Denmark, would not sell us Greenland. And he compared himself to the Messiah, by the way. All of it, other than the Messiah and Greenland stuff, happened just in one day, today. Most notably, this. The Dow Industrials lost some 624 points on the day. It came after these tweets from the president, quoting now, "We don't need China, and frankly would be far better off without them. Our great American companies are hereby ordered to immediately start looking for an alternative to China."
Israeli Defense Forces confirming that they had indeed attacked specifically Iranian targets as well as Shia militia because what they said that they were thwarting what was an imminent attack to use hitherto unknown variant of what they said were killer drones manufactured in Iran against Iranian targets. The Israeli Prime Minister, who is on the campaign trail to hold on to his job in elections in mid-September, repeated his statement that no Iranian force anywhere in the world could feel safe, entirely safe, from Israeli attack, and also quoted a Talmudic saying, "He who rises to kill you, kill him first." Now, this comes at a time of increased tensions and increased sense of Israelis' use of the doctrine of preemption, certainly from the Iraqi perspective, where in Iraq officials have blamed Israel for mysterious attacks on Shia militia and other Iranian-backed targets inside Iraqi territory.